So flavor is in a way a very simple compass that doesn't give you a 100% guarantee, but it gives you as close as possible a guarantee that that product is farmed in a way and grown in a way that it has a positive impact on the planet and a positive impact on your health, because there's also a good link to nutrition.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Franco Fubini is the founder and CEO of Natoora, a high-end greengrocer connecting chefs and home cooks with some of the world's best heritage produce through direct grower relationships. He's also a professor of sustainability management at Columbia University and the author of the new book In Search of the Perfect Peach, detailing Natoora's search for flavor-first food and impacting our food systems in the process. Franco Fubini, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
To start off today, I'm wondering if you could tell me about if there are any exciting pieces of produce in your fridge at home right now, or maybe on the countertop next to the fridge.
It's interesting because I've been traveling quite a bit, so there's not a huge amount. But there's some really cool shishitos, which this year we've been messing around with letting them ripen a bit more. So some of the shishitos are turning a bit brown and some are red. I would say that's been a very, very cool product at the moment, and something very new this year that we've done, because usually you harvest them entirely green.
Yeah, I was trying to think about if I've ever had a non-green shishito, and I don't think so. How does the flavor develop differently?
It goes a lot sweeter.
Yeah. Do you know about, I feel like I've heard statistics like 1 of every 20 shishitos is spicy, or 1 of every 10. Do you have any inclination there?
I mean, it's similar to the padron, where you've got that kind of 1 to 10. I think it's cool to get a spicy one here and there.
Yeah, I love it. But whenever it happens and I'm in a restaurant and I'm eating with people and then I have a reaction and no one else does, I feel a little self-conscious.
It can be a little problematic because when they are spicy, they're damn spicy.
Yeah, and you're not expecting it, so it hits a little bit harder.
Very much.
I'm really excited to have you on the show today. I think anyone who listens to the podcast knows that I'm like a self-described produce freak or nerd, and I think that you have the coolest job because you have access to so much incredible produce. And I'm wondering if to start today, you could just take a step back, tell me a little bit about your vision behind Natoora and the kind of work that you're doing with the business today.
Although I started Natoora in London, it kind of predates my time in London, and it started here in New York. I was doing a lot of cooking whilst working in finance at the time. And there was a real selfish need. I always talk about the selfish need for just wanting to get access to good quality product. And I don't know what it was with fruit and veg. It's always been very close and dear to me. I've always really enjoyed it. So I started noticing here in New York that there was a real gap of product that tasted really good. I found it really hard to find really good quality tomatoes in the summer, even though I was going to Union Square at Green Market.
And what timeline are we talking about right now?
This was the late 90s. Mm-hmm. So this is like 97, 98. And one of the things that I really noticed was whilst shopping, we have this story at Natoora that we tell internally, which is about a peach and me going to Cinderella's around Christmas time. There was snow outside, I remember very well, and this woman was asking for peaches. And the striking thing was that she asked where were the peaches, expecting that there should be peaches at that time, right? Not wondering whether someone had sourced them. And I just found it really odd that somebody would want peaches in the middle of the wintertime. Yeah. That's what I found really jarring. And so Natoora kind of started there. It started with this desire to get access to really good quality product. When I was growing up, I had access to that product by living in different, I'd say, lesser developed countries where the supermarket and the industrialization of the food system wasn't as present. And I just wanted to recapture that. And I thought that there were other people that would want a really great peach or a great tasting tomato. And that's really how it started.
Mm-hmm. And the peach that you're talking about, is that where your book title, the In Search of the Perfect Peach, comes from?
No, that is a different peach. That's an actual real seasonal peach, which is called Greta. It's a variety which I don't know exactly where it was originally bred. If it was, a lot of the very cool peach varieties come from, interestingly, from California or from the US. But it's a peach that is grown in Campania, so in the kind of Naples region of Italy. And what is striking about it is that it's a white peach, but when it's at its peak, it's almost entirely red inside.
Wow. What is that color coming from?
It's the anthocyanins, so the same molecules that turn blueberries blue and that are in cherries. So they're very nutritious, very healthy for you. A lot of antioxidants present in there. Yeah.
I feel like I was just talking about how I think peaches are my favorite fruit. I think they're kind of like lusted over in a way that like maybe tomatoes reaches a similar level of status, but I feel like there's something about stone fruit that has like this extra high level of interest for people. Do you see that in the business?
100%. Yeah. Both of those products that you mentioned, tomatoes and peaches, and I think interestingly, where you see the biggest gap in flavor with like supermarket produce is in things like peaches and tomatoes. They're
Yeah.
probably the two that if we were to do a poll and ask people where do you notice the difference, I think you'd say tomatoes would certainly be there, and then it would be stone fruit.
And why do you think that is?
I think there's an element of eating the product in its raw state, and the fact that they are fruits. And fruits, this is my belief at least, fruits have been designed to be eaten so that those seeds then get dispersed. That's the way that the plant figures that it's going to distribute its seed. So they're meant to be eaten, and therefore the flavor, I think, is geared for that, for animals to really want them. So really high in sugars. You know, if you think about a carrot is the root of a plant. The carrot never designed itself to want to be eaten, right? Whereas a fruit has been designed by evolution, by that plant, to be its reproductive mechanism, and it does that by wanting to be eaten. So I think that that's where you get fruits that taste the way they do. And I think that's the main driver of this allure that we have with something like an incredible peach that is perfectly ripe in terms of just the complexity of flavor, the sweetness, the juiciness.
Yeah, I think also maybe the fact that tomatoes often undergo refrigeration when you're transporting them to a big grocery store. I feel like as somebody who works in food media, you always see that you should leave your tomatoes out on the counter, like they shouldn't have to undergo that process. So I wonder if that maybe is impacting flavor differences a bit as well.
100%, yeah. The logistics component, right? So the movement of product is important in produce distribution or in getting food into supermarkets and into our plates. And the issue with fruits is that when they're at peak, they're very delicate. So inevitably what we've done is we pick them when they're not ripe, and then we transport them and get them onto supermarket shelves, and they sit there. And that's where you get the big problem and the big lack of one of the big issues with flavor on those products.
Yeah. So when we talk about flavor, I would say the thesis of your book, In Search of the Perfect Peach, is that flavor should kind of guide how we're trying to fix the food system, which we know is in this really industrialized and kind of capitalistic state. Can you kind of unpack why using flavor as a guide is a good metric for thinking about food systems in a different way?
I think there's an emotional component that for me is important. So it starts. This is the trigger, and then I'll explain to you why flavor is important. But the trigger for me is important because sometimes we just want to have a really good tasting tomato, right? And if I can win you over with flavor, then your purchase decisions hopefully will get altered and get changed, and you'll want to have another really good tomato and not go for the supermarket one. So flavor has this emotional, this really visceral connection with us. So flavor is in a way a very simple compass that doesn't give you a 100% guarantee, but it gives you as close as possible a guarantee that that product is farmed in a way and grown in a way that it has a positive impact on the planet and a positive impact on your health, because there's also a good link to nutrition.
Yeah, I feel like there are a couple different case studies in the book that you talk about as examples of like how a specific varietal could have only been created in a way that is based in like generational knowledge instead of industrialization. And like radicchio, I think, is one example that comes to mind. Do you think there are any specific items of produce that people could think about as like a more practical example of why the taste means that it was being grown in a good way?
It's a very good question. I mean, it all does, but I think of rhubarb as another one of those examples. Perhaps the way to answer it is that any ingredient that has complexity to it in terms of flavor, where you don't just get sweetness or you don't just get this flat taste, but you get some sweetness, you get acidity, you might get floral notes. All of that complexity equals nutrition in a way. And you build that nutrition through really good soil practices and healthy soils, and good varietals and good farming methods, right? So where you see complexity, and complexity is also a function of the varietals. So that's where you get to, this Radicchio and Veneto. You get the whole, I guess, trifecta. You get the variety, you get the soil, and you get the farming practices.
So I think talking about flavor as a guide, obviously chefs come to mind as people who would be interested in trying different varietals, maybe ones that are less familiar because they want to beat everyone else in terms of having what's there first. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how Natoora's history of partnering with chefs has shaped the business.
Yeah, it's interesting because we set up to fix the problem for consumers. And then a couple of years in, we started supplying restaurants, and it really transformed the business. And it transformed it in part because of these partnerships that we started building and how it stimulated the kind of sourcing that we needed to undertake. So chefs are very busy, but at the same time, they're really pushing the boundary in terms of flavor and in terms of innovation in the kitchen. And that leads you, if you want to differentiate yourself, to source and source and source so that you can find that product, you can improve on the quality, you can improve on the varieties, you can widen the range. So the chefs have been instrumental. I mean, Natoora wouldn't be what it is today if we didn't have the backing of the chefs to really guide the way that we've evolved our product offering and push the boundaries on flavor.
In practice, what does that look like? Is it like everybody wants ramps, so you find more ramp sourcing, or how does it work?
That's one example, right? So you have a product that becomes really popular. We were talking about, what was it? The cabbage, the Caraflex?
Caraflex cabbage, yeah.
Outside. So a lot of demand, you need to find multiple sources for it. Sometimes it's wanting to find a point of difference in the marketplace. So you're starting to look for varieties that no one else is sourcing, or trying to bring a variety that you've seen in one region into another region. So there, it's a little bit more about getting creative or finding farms willing to try new things. So yeah, it can take a couple of different guises.
Yeah. I'm really curious about how you go about building relationships with farmers and maintaining them over the years. In the beginning, did you already know about these farms that were doing special things? Did you have a whisper network of people that were saying hey, this guy grows great Radicchio?
No, we didn't. It's funny. A lot of people ask us, how do you find product? First thing to say is that it's very different at the beginning than the way it is now. And then it depends by region, right? So
we're talking 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 20 years ago, our farming network was inexistent. We didn't have the volume to buy straight from farms, so we had to develop that. So it evolves. At the beginning, it's a little bit like detective work. You're just going about trying to find products. Sometimes you go to a market and you see a box of product, you see the region, you might go and contact that farmer that's on that box if their address and number is there. So there's been a lot of that over the years. As that network grows, it becomes easier and easier because you build that whisper network that you allude to, where you you know where the good farms are, you get recommended to farms, people are friends, so the network you kind of start getting embedded into the farming community.
Yeah, I would imagine also on the consumer end, things have just shifted so much in the past 20 years. Even the fact that we're talking about, Caraflex as a status cabbage or Sun Gold tomatoes. I would say over the past couple of years, produce has really gotten a cult following for specific varietals. Is that something that you've noticed as a shift on your end too?
Very much.
And what does that look like in practice? Does that mean that you just have to chase down everyone that's growing good Sun Golds? How do you try to meet the demand without maybe overreaching?
One of the best ways to do that is to do farm planning or crop planning with farms, and just making sure that we are predicting where the market is going and that we can then work with select farms to grow more of a specific product. That's the best way that you plan kind of medium, long term.
Are there any specific products that you guys have previously forecast as being popular, or maybe things that you're anticipating for the future now?
I mean, one that's worked incredibly well is the Delica pumpkin that we bring a little bit here to the U.S., but we actually want to start farming it in Mexico or in the U.S. But in Europe, the growth of that product has been probably, if not the single greatest success in terms of product, one of the greatest successes that we've had.
I'm like racking my brain trying to think if I've ever eaten this before. What makes this pumpkin so special?
So it's a kabocha variety. There are a lot of kabochas. In Italy, they call it a delica. What makes it really special is the curing practice. So it's farmed really well by a good friend of mine, Oscar. But importantly, what he does is he mimics the curing process that a lot of pumpkin farmers used to do at a very artisanal level for their own consumption. So pumpkins get stored in a cellar, in a kind of packing shed, with heat and dehumidifying. So you control the moisture that's coming out of the pumpkin, make sure that the pumpkins don't rot. And what you end up doing is you concentrate the flavor because it removes about 30% of moisture. So if you can imagine that a pumpkin that's weighing, 5 pounds will end up weighing 3.5 pounds, right? It loses a third of its weight. And that concentrates flavors, concentrates sugars, adds complexity. I think the success was down to the fact that in the fall, and I guess with people moving more and more towards plant-based, if not diets, more vegetable-based products on menus, the Delica pumpkin is such an incredibly tasting ingredient that it can replace protein very easily. So I think it became incredibly popular because of that. It just fits this really beautiful gap in the market for products that can stand on their own.
It makes me think a little bit about honey nut squash and then the row 8 seed squash. I can't remember what that one is called. It's like a honey nut.
Koji nut.
Koji nut, yeah. Which I think honey nut is popular in the US largely just because it's so adorable and like you can cut through it without having to deal with the butternut stem in that kind of way. It's kind of interesting to think about use cases for like produce as a product. Like how much are you talking with farmers about trying to tweak elements of them to be like a better product?
Not in the way that you describe. So we do talk a lot about, and I guess because most of the people we work with are chefs.
Right.
So when you get to the consumer, I think that the use case is fundamental, and it's part of the reason why we as humans consume a lot of fruits. So tomato being a fruit, cucumbers being fruits, like the vast majority of what we consume tend to be fruits. And I think it's because of this ease of preparation that you get. But we do talk a lot to farmers about harvest time, about sometimes about selecting product at different stages so that we can tweak the way that a product behaves in the kitchen.
Can you give an example of that?
I mean, a fantastic example is a whole category we created, which is green citrus. So I was inspired by bergamot, which is a citrus, which gets used for essential oils and a lot of perfume.
Tea sometimes.
Tea, yeah, for Earl Grey, exactly. And it's harvested in its green state. Now, we started sourcing bergamot, fresh bergamot, which was impossibly hard to find back in the day. No one was using it except for the industry. And it gets harvested in the green state because the essential oils are much more volatile. You just get this incredible floral fragrance out of it. And I was in a citrus grove on holiday in Positano, the Nerano Positanos on the Amalfi Coast, and I saw some oranges that were in their green state. It was September, end of August, beginning of September, so probably about 2 months before they were ready, maybe 3. And that led us to creating a category of citrus, which we call green citrus, which gets harvested anywhere from 1 to 3 months before the citrus is ready. So we selected 3 varieties, and on the back of that, we created a new category, which is the citrus that gets used in a completely different way to the ripe citrus. So that was a way that we really modified in partnership with the farmers when something gets harvested so that we can create a different product category.
Right. And is it being used similarly to bergamot in terms of tea, like infusion, that kind of thing? Or is the green citrus category having more experimentation?
Much more experimentation. So it's getting used a lot. And we've done this in Europe for many years. We're now under the 3rd or 4th season here in the US. So it's being used a lot in desserts and also in fish cooking, I would say, primarily.
Yeah, I would imagine it would have a really kind of unique and delicious perfume. I want to get your thoughts on different growing regions around the world. I feel like what I would imagine would be a fun part of your job would be getting to go to different places and touring farms. And I'm curious if there's a specific region that has a terroir or just growing practices that is especially close to your heart.
One that I don't talk about a lot is Sardinia. because Sicily is kind of one of those that comes to mind. I enjoy going to Sicily a huge amount, and I go there a lot. But Sardinia is really incredible. There's something about islands that make them very magical. They're a little bit more insular. But what Sardinia has is it hasn't been farmed very aggressively. Sicily has. A lot of parts of Sicily have been used to farm very intensively, primarily tomatoes. Sardinia just hasn't had this. So the soil there is in an incredible state already. And I've tasted some of the most complex products in Sardinia. It's also, I mean, anywhere in Italy, you know, from a food perspective, you can't go wrong. So it has that going for it. And it's a little bit more, have you ever been to Sardinia?
No, but now I want to go.
The Sardinians are very terse people.
Yeah.
And that makes it quite cool. They're their own kind of ecotype. And the landscape is like that as well. Like you drive around and it's just a little bit more wild. There's tons of like wild fennel growing. I don't know, it's just you feel like you're 20, 30, maybe even 50 years behind, right? It doesn't feel like you're in the 2020s. And to me, that just provides this, I don't know if you can say rusticity, this kind of rustic element, this kind of gritty, back-to-earth element about Sardinia that is fantastic. So whether it's the people, the food, the climate, the physical beauty of it, and the soil makes for a really incredible product.
Yeah. And you moved to New York 4 years ago, maybe? I'm curious what you think about the growing region we have here in like the Northeast, like tri-state area. Are you going to the farmers markets here? And do you feel like there's anything special or good happening in this part of the world too?
I do. I think there's a lot special that is happening here. We work a lot with farms all the way from, you know, New York up to Vermont and down south as well, into South Carolina. And now we're doing some work in Florida as well. But I think one of the exciting things that you see in the US more so than in Europe is the number of young farmers. And particularly in our space, in looking at farmers that are, what label can I use? Anyways, that are farming with a soul first mentality, that have gotten into farming for the love of the environment, love of good quality food, that are wanting to do things right. Most of the farmers that fall into that category tend to be young here in the US. And I think it's part of the kind of entrepreneurial spirit and nature of the American spirit that I think just has bred a lot of movement in that sector of the farming industry, which you don't see in Europe. So I see a lot of hope and opportunity here in the US.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I think something that I noticed that was interesting when I moved to the East Coast after growing up in California, certainly like the level of apples and like the way people feel about apples was new to me. But I think also I've been seeing a lot of farms on the East Coast that are growing like heritage vegetables from different like immigrant communities and like having them be available at the farmers market as well, which is kind of a cool thing to get to see.
Yeah, it's very cool. But you know, you coming from LA, I mean, over there, it's a luxury.
It's not really fair to compare. Yeah.
No.
I mean, I love New York and I'm very happy to live here. But when my mom sends me photos of the farmers market in Santa Monica in March and they have strawberries that she said they've had for weeks already and things like that, it does make me feel a little sad.
Yeah. I think Santa Monica farmers market was the first, and this is not to say anything bad about the incredible farmers that you find around the US, but my experience at Santa Monica, my first time, was that I had seen things there that impressed me to the level that I had been impressed in other travels, like in Europe and in Asia.
Yeah, there's things that are being grown and sold there, like Buddha's hand or cherimoya, that like I feel like you can't find at the supermarket. Like it's a really specific thing that's happening.
Yeah.
So earlier you talked about how the idea for Natoora in part came from seeing somebody that was looking for a peach out of season. I feel like that's obviously coming from a sustainability perspective, that we should be eating seasonally. And I know that you actually are a professor of sustainability management at Columbia. And I'm curious how you think about sustainability in working with Natoora. Obviously, soil health is a part of it. But then I think if I hear about shipping things from the other side of the world, like that comes at a cost as well. So how do you kind of approach that?
There are two things that I'd like to say. One is that I think that if you are to achieve significant level of impact, which is what we want to achieve, and this is a kind of broad argument, but you'll see where I'm getting to. So if you want to have really significant impact, you need to do it at scale. In order to shift people's consumption at scale, you need to meet people in the middle in a way. So compromise is fundamental. And this is true, I think, in terms of moving any sort of consumption. So it can be a matter of price, it can be a matter of availability, accessibility. So our perspective at Natoora is that we live in a world that is globalized. We live in a world where I'm not saying that air travel is fundamental. You know, we can travel less and we can live more sustainably and make better choices. But travel is a good example where we all now live far from our families, or most of us do, right? The world has changed significantly, so it's fundamental that we do travel if we are to see our families. So the world has changed. We're in a more globalized world. The food system is globalized, and therefore you need to think cleverly about the choices that you make. Where do you feel that the choices that you make lean more on having a positive impact or negative impact? And in the case of transporting produce, I'd say that we transport literally a handful of fresh ingredients from Europe to the US. But those that do come, we believe that the cultural preservation, the cultural heritage that we are preserving and that we are in some way stimulating far outweighs, so creating a bigger market far outweighs the transportation of those ingredients a long distance. Also in practical terms, transport is a very small fraction of the total carbon footprint of an ingredient. So it's not as bad as people think, right? There are other things that we do that have a far bigger impact on, at least in terms of CO2 emissions.
Yeah, and I think the third piece of that is that if you're going to the grocery store, a lot of that produce is being flown in from somewhere else anyways. Unless you're going to the farmer's market, most of what we eat is not necessarily coming from 50 miles or 100 miles from our home.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll have salads at the supermarket that have been hydroponically grown in a greenhouse. And those greenhouses, at least today, are very incredibly energy inefficient, right? So those products have, whilst they talk a lot about the water usage in hydroponically grown produce or greenhouse grown produce, the energy footprint there is not very good.
Wow, I feel like sometimes when I go to the grocery store, I get caught in the aisle trying to decide the best decision to make for the planet, and even like reading an egg carton or thinking about eating tofu versus like locally grown chicken, like those kinds of questions I think can be really destabilizing. Do you think as consumers, like, is there a best way to be navigating all of that? Are we even meant to be questioning all of these things in our head at one time?
We certainly should be questioning them
Mm-hmm.
because if we want to live in a healthier, coexist in a healthier way with nature, we must. And it's also in, the clothes that we buy and, all of our consumption habits, which are a little bit out of hand. I mean, I just wrote a book, arguing that flavor is what we should be utilizing. And I kind of stand by that. I think that sometimes it's hard when you're at the grocery store. I think part of the problem is that we are inundated with variety. We're inundated with a lot of different marketing pitches. I think a great example of that is all of the non-dairy alternatives, where people are trading dairy, which maybe for them is a good thing, for these dairy alternatives, but those dairy alternatives are highly processed products that come from ingredients which have been industrially farmed with a lot of chemicals, both during and post-harvest, so almonds being one of them. Almonds are also very poor from a sustainability standpoint, particularly the almonds that go into almond milk, which are grown in California.
For water use, right? Is
water
the
use,
problem?
yeah. Water use, a lot of pesticide and a lot of pesticide fungal treatments post harvest and so forth. So yeah, really not good. So yeah, it's a very tricky landscape to navigate. What flavor does, so I'll give you a good example going back to the hydroponic product is if you were to take a hydroponically farmed lettuce and you take a lettuce still from the supermarket aisle that tastes a lot better, the chances are that the one that tastes better has more nutrition, has been grown in soil. That soil has a better biology to it than the substrate that the hydroponic salad has been grown on. chances are that the carbon footprint is a lot lower. You could argue that the hydroponically one, you're almost guaranteed that there are no chemicals on it. And in the conventional salad, you will have chemicals that have been utilized. But if I were to take a balanced view, I would say that from an impact perspective and from a nutrition and health perspective, you're better off with washing that salad and eating it rather than eating the hydroponically farmed one. So without knowing all of that, you can make the assumption that what tastes better is going to be better for you.
I like that assumption. I wanted to talk with you about the Food Planet Prize, which is the largest environmental prize in the world focused on food system solutions, and you're a judge on that panel. I believe it's a $2 million prize to one recipient, which is huge. I'm curious what criteria you judge on, and if you could tell us a little bit about the winner this year.
So we are looking for initiatives, because it could be a profit, nonprofit, and it's different stages. But we're looking for initiatives that can have significant impact, so really, really large-scale impact, ideally across the world, both in the global south and the global north, and that can scale massively. So that's the kind of broad criteria. Me personally, I tend to look at, not always, but I tend to put high up financial sustainability, because I do believe that we need not everything, as the winner C40 this year demonstrated, but generally I think that projects that are underpinned by a solid economic model that is financially sustainable have a greater ability to scale and to deliver impact for the food system. But so I look at it as an investor in a way. Even though we are not investing money into a business, I do tend to take that slant in how we, or at least how I vote, and the criteria that I use to evaluate projects. But this year, I was actually super excited about C40, which is a network. It stems from a project. I think it was Ken Livingstone, who was the mayor in London when I was living there many years ago. And they set up a network of cities, some of the leading cities in the world. I think there are 56 at the moment. There were 40, I think, when they started, hence the name. The really, really incredible thing about C40 and the food side of C40s, the food initiative, is that they're working with cities to target policy and policy directives. And what's important to understand is that 80% of our food consumption is going to happen in cities by 2050. I don't know where it stands now, but it's a vast majority. So the vast majority of our food is consumed in cities. And the other very interesting fact is that governments, local governments, right? So the mayor controls the largest food purchasing budget in that city, because they control the purchasing for prison systems, for schools, hospitals. So you have one individual with his team, right? A mayor who single-handedly can make the largest purchaser of food in that city shift habits. And cities are the place where most of us eat. So you can see how powerful that combination is. And that's essentially why C40 won the prize.
Yeah,
I think
especially as a member of Eric Adams' city, I understand that impact, because we certainly are not doing a lot when it comes to composting or even things unrelated to that as well. How many different proposals?
There's over 1,000 that arrive each year, and then we see anywhere from 10 to 8 proposals as the jury. Right?
Yeah.
So they get refined down and refined down and refined down, and then the board of the foundation, of the Kurt Bergfors Foundation, hands over to the jurors roughly around 8 final proposals that we receive evaluations from. We go through them, we discuss them internally as a jury over a couple of days, and then we meet all together and we have presentations from these let's call them 8 finalists, and then we cast our votes.
And duke it out and see.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's amazing. Thank you for running through that with me. And to close today, I want to play a little taste check game with you. So I'll give you a category and you can tell me the answer that comes into your head. And I am going to ask you to play favorites with produce. So I hope that's okay.
It's
part of the job. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Your favorite season for produce?
Summer.
Okay. And then for each season, summer, fall, winter, spring, I'll run through them, like a specific heirloom varietal that Natoora sells that's your favorite. So for summer?
The Greta peach.
For fall?
Maybe the Delica pumpkin.
For winter?
For winter, probably the Mirinda tomato. Yeah.
It counts as a winter tomato?
It's a winter tomato. That's a whole other story.
Wait, I need to know a little more. What is a winter tomato?
So winter tomato is a tomato that's grown in winter.
Where?
No, it's a farming innovation. That's how I call it. That occurred in Sicily and Sardinia. No one knows where exactly. I think Sicilians were the first ones. It's a technique of stressing a tomato plant to produce a really tasty fruit. When you stress plants, they tend to produce better fruit. It's the same as when you see somebody who's scarred and all that, like they've lived through a bit of a tougher life. They've seen a bit more of the world, and they're, I don't know,
richer for it.
Yeah, they're richer for it. They're kind of more interesting individual, if you say. So plants go through the same thing, but you can only do this in wintertime because in the summertime you cannot stress that plant as much because it's too hot. So you need to water it. Otherwise, you kill it off very quick. So in the summer, you have to give it too much water. In wintertime, you can stress these plants a lot. You have to think that this is wintertime in Sicily or Sardinia or the south of Spain. So it's not New York winter.
Right.
So they're warmer winters. But still, you can only farm these tomatoes in the wintertime. And I was struggling to get the chefs to understand that. And they were telling me, we're not putting tomatoes on the menu in the wintertime. And I was like, but these are in season now. I'm not trying to sell you a non-seasonal product. This is in season now. Yeah, my customers won't understand it. And I was like, but they're fucking delicious. Like, what are you talking about? Like, these tomatoes are incredible. They're insane. And they'd be like, I get it. They are, but they're not going on the menu. And I came up with this idea of calling the winter tomatoes because we source 3 of them, 3 primary categories from 3 different regions. And I just started calling them winter tomatoes. So that's what they are. But they are a very crunchy, thick-skinned, acidic, sweet with a really salty flavor. It's the total opposite of a summer tomato, which is like sweet and sweet and soft and, I don't know, very tomatoey. These are very weird. And when you have it the first time, it really messes with your mind because you're like, this has nothing to do with the tomato that I'm accustomed to.
Do you bring them over to America?
We're not allowed to.
Oh.
Yeah.
Says like the powers that control the ports?
The powers that control the borders, yeah.
Okay.
But if you make your way in the wintertime, spring, to Europe, then I will gladly give you a lot of winter tomatoes.
Yeah, I really have to try one now. Okay, your favorite item of produce for spring?
English peas.
Your favorite cookbook right now?
Oh, right now?
You could say in general, and you could do one right now if you want.
Okay. Well, right now I haven't been reading many cookbooks lately. I mean, the one that always comes to mind as my favorite all time is Jacques Pepin's La Technique, just because it just holds a very dear place in my, I guess, culinary history. And now, I don't know. I mean, the book that comes to mind that I've been lately looking at with my daughter was Claire Patak's latest book.
Both great. Your favorite ice cream flavor?
Stracciatella.
Your go-to bodega snack?
Oh, go-to bodega snack. I go through a lot of Cliff Bars because of travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The unsexy but true answer. Something that you would never make from scratch at home?
Garum, fish sauce. Yeah.
Your favorite restaurant here in New York?
Okonomi ramen.
A restaurant that's not here in New York that you wish could magically open here?
Damn,
and it would be the same.
I was going to say, but then I'm like, it just doesn't belong in New York. It belongs where it is.
Somehow it
belongs
would be the
in
same.
Sicily. Somehow, okay. All right. If I could have it, I Rizzari in Sicily.
What's the deal? I've never been.
My favorite restaurant in the world. It's in Brucoli, tiny village. I shouldn't even be saying this because it should stay kind of. It should stay hidden. It's this really beautiful restaurant that's sitting on the water. You can see the Etna. Emanuele and Viviana are a couple. They run it. He's a fantastic chef. Incredible seafood. Super simple food. The set, just everything. It's like 3-star cooking.
Well, I think it'll be safe and stay in Sicily and not appear here.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. A fictional food scene, like from a book or a movie or TV show, that you wish you could eat in real life.
Did you ever see Eat, Drink, Man, Woman?
Yeah.
So that first scene where he's like, prepping the fish and frying the fish and making all these dumplings, that's always captivated me, that scene.
That's a great answer, and I will be thinking about winter tomatoes for a long time, Franco. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure and very fun.
This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.